Walking past this theater today in Chicago, you would have no idea about the horror that occurred here 121 years ago. If you plan on visiting Chicago, save this video so you could check this out for yourself. On December 30th, 1903, the opulent Iroquois Theater had only been open for 5 weeks, and on this day it was filled with over 1,700 patrons, most of which were children, their mothers, and teachers who were enjoying their winter holiday break. The crowd gathered to see a musical called Mr. Bluebeard. But as the show began its second act around 3:15 that afternoon, a malfunctioning stage light would ignite a fabric backdrop. As the fire began to spread, the audience sat there stunned and confused on if the fire was part of the musical or not. In fact, the star of the musical, named Eddie Foy, went on stage to let the audience know, remain calm, we're handling this, and actually instructed the orchestra to keep playing music. All while stagehands were attempting to lower a fire retardant curtain down onto the flames, but as they're doing this, the curtain snags and gets stuck. Within moments, the fire began to engulf the props and curtains. Audience members quickly flooded towards the narrow and poorly lit aisles in an attempt to make it to the exit, although most of the exits were hidden with curtains, while patrons sitting in the upper levels of the theater were actually trapped in place by metal accordion gates that were locked just to prevent audience members from sneaking down to the lower main seats during an intermission. In fact, the lead of the musical, Eddie Foy, would recall as he stood on stage and looked out at the audience, he could see a mad animal-like stampede. Their screams, groans, and snarls. The scuffle of thousands of feet and bodies grinding against bodies, merging into a crescendo of half wail, half roar. Terrified cast members would quickly begin to escape throughout the back door of the theater, but this would only make matters much worse. Since when they opened that back door, a massive draft of oxygen created a huge ball of fire that essentially exploded into the entire theater. Surviving witnesses would recall that as this happened, a ballerina was actually still on stage in her ringing, which was the ropes that were connecting her to the top of the stage so this way she could be lifted and float among the stage, and she was trapped as this ball of fire exploded. The ball of flames instantly killed her and all the others who were still trapped inside the upper balconies of the theater. In fact, the blast of the flames was so powerful that it actually blasted open one of the locked emergency exits, which helped a few lucky people escape. Meanwhile, those trapped upstairs in the theater's hallways frantically found one emergency exit just to realize that the fire exit had no ladder leading to the ground. So workmen who were working in a building across from the alleyway of the building quickly slid wooden planks across to make a makeshift bridge, although during the panic, the first 2 patrons who went on this board slipped off the wood and fell to their deaths. By the time the firefighters arrived on scene, hundreds of bodies were already piled up inside of the theater. Tragically, 602 people lost their lives in the incident and many more were injured. The diner next to the theater was transformed into an emergency morgue and hospital as doctors searched through the pile of charred people to identify any survivors. All while distraught family members began to sift through the stacked piles of charred bodies looking for their missing loved ones. I was just in Chicago, so I took these photos, and I have to admit it was very eerie knowing the history and walking through this alleyway. Overall, the Great Chicago Theater disaster led to significant changes in fire safety regulations and building codes, prompting improvements in theater safety nationwide, and these reforms are still implemented to this day. In 1921, the Nederlander Theater was built in its place, and allegedly, the grounds of this theater, as well as the alleyway behind it, are haunted by those who died in the tragedy from 1903. And if you're a fan of all things interesting and horrific, follow along because that's what I make videos on.